Hey everyone, this is Chris.
And Lorenzo.
And welcome to our Best of Saturday series. Now that we have hundreds of episodes, we get a lot of listeners asking us where to start.
So we'll be selecting some of our most popular episodes to share each Saturday from our years of podcasting. We hope you enjoy it.
No role plays, just real. Chris and Lorenzo share 4 decades of combined experience to help you become a more effective leader.
We've never really, as a workforce, spent a lot of time on making sure we're developing good leaders.
We'll be able to share stories, experience, mistakes, failures, successes.
This is Hacking Your Leadership.
Welcome to Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Chris.
And I'm Lorenzo.
And Lorenzo, on today's episode, I would like to talk a little bit about fairness. I came across an article on the Harvard Business Review recently on organizational fairness. And the kind of crux of the article, which we'll link to in the podcast episode description, is around the idea that managers who are overworked and not rewarded on fairness tend to have a harder time treating their employees fairly than those who are not overworked and those who are rewarded on how fair they treat their employees. And this kind of struck a chord with me because I've always believed that the perception of fairness is equally important, if not more important, than the actual fairness itself. Meaning you could be treating people fairly, but if they don't think they're being treated fairly, it doesn't matter. And you could be treating people unfairly, but if they think they're being treated fairly, then that's better. And so there's a lot to kind of unpack here, but what I want to talk about when in relation to this is what part of leadership do you think fairness plays? Like, is it a big part? Have you had a hard time being fair as a leader in your career? Do you find that there are times when you have to throw fairness out the window because of expediency or because the job gets in the way? Has that burned you? Have you been called out as being unfair when you thought you were being fair? I mean, how has this looked in your leadership career?
That was a lot of questions.
Yeah, I know.
That was unfair of you to ask.
Do you remember them all? Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, I thought I was being fair, but if you perceive that as unfair, then that's on me.
Yeah. Well, look, I've got a younger sister who's 2 years younger than I am, and we were latchkey kids growing up, so I was always in charge.
Right.
So I know all about unfairness.
Sure.
In being the elder, sibling and always having to be in charge.
Right.
But yeah, when it comes to leadership, I think there's fairness is a big deal. I think many times though, it's remembering that people, while the definition of fairness in the dictionary may say one thing, people have their own thoughts on what they believe is fair, and most of the time, in most instances that I've seen as a leader, it's the only time people have a problem with fairness is when they feel that they're being treated unfairly. And,
Sure.
and I know we've spoken about this before, specifically around something like compensation, right?
Oh, yeah.
Where somebody says, maybe they get an offer or they get compensation and they feel it wasn't enough or it was unfair or they have heard other people make more in the same role or that type of thing. And that's when they want to talk about it. When they normally don't talk about it is when they get a role and they feel that they're being fairly compensated, and they don't ask, well, am I making more than other people? Maybe I should give some of this money back. Like that shouldn't be fair. I shouldn't make more than others. It should only matter when I'm making less than others.
Wait, you don't have a line of employees out the door telling you about those times and wanting you to make things more fair?
Yeah, I can tell you what, in my 20 plus years of leadership, I have yet to have an employee tell me, wait a minute, that's too much money.
Wow. Wow, that must be just you then. Yeah.
It's just me. Yeah.
Yeah.
Clearly others may be making less, and that should be there. So yeah, I think what you said though was spot on around the idea of the perception of fairness, right? Like at the end of the day, I do my best to talk to people about, here's where I will be fair. I will spend the time and effort and blood, sweat, and tears in supporting and helping people that want to help themselves, that want to show up when they're supposed to be here, and want to push our culture forward and our team forward in a positive way. And so if you do those things, I will give you my time, and I will give you opportunity to accelerate yourself in your development. If you don't do those things, if you're not able to come in and do that type of work and you want to engage in that way, then I will tell you up front that you will not get that time. You will not get that attention. You will not get that accelerant, because it is impossible to spend all the time with everybody that you want to.
Right.
So people kind of have to self-select. So you could say, well, that's unfair. If you're a leader, you should, quote unquote, care about, and you should invest equally in all of your people. I'm willing to invest in the people that are willing to invest in us, and that are willing to invest in themselves. And so what I do as a leader is really explain my thoughts on fairness up front, and explain it as many times as I can to as many people that will listen. That way, there is not this confusion, or there is not this issue when something happens and somebody goes, well, wait a minute, that's not fair. You spent time with that person, or you did this, or you allowed that individual to do this thing, right? Because I did all that I could up front to explain how this actually works. Now, I have also yet to be in an environment where every single person is doing all of those things in a way that is going to take all of my time. I've been really fortunate to work with teams where a lot of people have, and the cool thing about that is I also had leaders that I've been able to invest in and accelerate their development so that they can carry forward that type of engagement with our team. So I know it's kind of a long, ranty answer, but the reality is that I think the only way, fairness is a big deal, and the only way to get ahead of it is to really talk about things like expectations and commitments, and how and where you spend your time and why you spend your time the way that you do as a leader.
Right. So I think you're spot on with it, though, because the first thing that I took from this is you talking about growing up with your sister. And I have a sister who's a year and a half younger than myself. And I remember being a young teenager and being explained by my parents when I was going to be allowed to do certain things, and they would ground their answer in age. You're allowed to do this when you're this age.
Yeah.
And I would say, okay, that makes sense. Like, maybe sometimes I fought with them over it, but either way, I was the one counting down the days. And when that age happened, I was like, all right, I get to do this now based on what you said to me. And that was great. However, because of the expediency of not wanting to have different rules for different people, a lot of times my sister, at a year and a half younger, was able to do the same things that I was able to do at the exact same time. Not at the same age, but at the same time. So if my curfew was, went from, 10 o'clock to 11 o'clock on a Saturday night, so did hers at the exact same time. Not when she got to the same age that I was at. And that was because they didn't want to have to remember two different curfews. They just extended it to both of us. And so was that fair or was it not fair? I guess it depends on who you are. If you are my parents, then that's fair because they don't want to have to, it's about expediency. If you're me, then it's fair in that it doesn't really impact me. What my sister goes and does with her friends and whether she gets to stay out an extra hour and a half or 2 hours to be home at the same time I got to come home, it doesn't impact me one iota, except that I perceive it as unfair because of the year and a half that I didn't get to do it that now she gets to. And so it has to do with whether or not I can get out of my own head and worry about what is fair to myself. And that's really hard for people to do. It's really hard for people to get out of their own heads. A great example of this that's happening right now is there's the website, the TrueCar website. Have you been to the TrueCar.com website?
Yep.
Where they basically show what people paid for every car before you go and buy it. Because people in their own mind, they don't inherently know what a car is worth. And so they don't know whether or not what they paid for a car is fair until they can compare what they paid to what other people paid. And if they look at, well, there's 10 people and 8 of them paid more than me and 2 of them paid less than me, and I got kind of right in that little sweet spot right there, that makes them feel better about it. Now, all those numbers could go up by $1,000. They'll still feel the exact same way because it's not about what is actually fair. It's about what they perceive as fair. And so what you're saying, your example that you gave with your employees about how you try to be upfront with them, you need to be upfront with them because in the absence of telling them about how you're grounding your your desire to be fair and your actions and your the finite amount of time you have and how you're kind of trying to be fair, what they will do is they'll flip around the cart and the horse, and they'll think that you're playing favorites with people and that's why they're getting ahead, when in actuality you're just responding to people who have self-selected that they want to get ahead. But without that conversation with your employees, without saying this is how I run things, left to their own devices, they will think that you picked favorites.
Sure. No, absolutely. And that's why I think even in, environments where you've got, whether it's meetings or you have a good amount of employees, or you have opportunities to talk to, or answer an individual's question, but in a public forum, that's where you really get a chance to talk about this and explain, how and why you do things as a leader. I think the other place outside of maybe compensation and promotions, and then even like time with a leader, from a fairness standpoint, it is around things that happen, to kind of to your point with your sister, where an employee says, well, this employee's path was this way, or, and so like I'm following the same path, yet I haven't been given the same opportunity, or, well, what I've perceived in the past is that you have to do this, that, and this to then get this. And so they've then defined in their brain, because somebody else did it that way, that's the way that it must be done. So anything outside of that is not fair.
Right. They're connecting the dots going backwards as opposed to actually trying to figure out why a person is succeeding.
Absolutely. And so, that I think that's the other part of leadership that stirs that pot a little bit, is the fact that, for the vast majority of us, especially I think in all industries, retail and everywhere else, the speed of the business and evolution and change and what was necessary or needed, we've talked about this on the show 3 months ago, 6 months ago, a year ago, 2 years ago. Those things change so quickly that many times, timing is of the essence. Either relevant work, relevant results, or even relevant experience previous to the role that people are in today can come to the top when those things are necessary, when those things are needed.
Of course.
And so, yeah. So, but I think many times when it doesn't happen as often, and when it's kind of like breaks the mold a little bit, that's typically when people start to kind of like throw the fairness flag. And, and again, I think my philosophy on that is have the conversation, sit down with that person and listen to them and allow them to vent, to explain, to talk through it, provide them with maybe examples or perspective, provide them with analogies, and at the end of the day, though, from a leadership standpoint, it's talk to them about them. I'm pretty sure we've said this quote before on the show. If not, I'll say it now. And I'm 99% positive it's Theodore Roosevelt who said it, but he said, comparison is the thief of joy. And just the idea of how much time people spend comparing themselves, comparing their journey, comparing their compensation, comparing whatever it is to others, just takes away your joy. And I believe that fairness can be one of those things sometimes where, sometimes in the world there is just things that happen that are unfair. And,
right.
and it is what it is, right? Like they've happened in my life, they've happened in your life. Those things happen. But many times I think that piece around the perception of fairness is actually the bigger piece, and in getting out of our own heads and moving forward. And to your point, like, with your sister, the fact that she gets to stay out just as long, it has zero impact on what you do or what you hang out with and when you have to be home, right? Like that's on her completely. And I feel the same way with people, is that like what they do and how they feed their family and make their living is yes, while we may be the same job, the same role, the same title, it has nothing to do with what you do and how you feed your family and how you do these types of things. And so really, like that's the focus, that we should stay on.
Yeah, I like what you said about the changing landscape too, because that has impacted me real life in my past. And that's when communication, I think, becomes even more important. So to give you a real world example, I graduated college in 2002, and when the entire time I was in college, my degree's in psychology, and I took criminal justice classes. And in my head, when I was anywhere between 16 and 21, 22 years old, I wanted to be an FBI agent. That's what I wanted to be when I was a teenager. And I graduated college, 8 months or 9 months after 9/11, and there was this internship program through the FBI that was for people who just graduated college, and it was for you go to it during the summer after you graduate to see if you wanted to do that. And I counted down the years. Like, I wanted to apply, but you couldn't apply until you were graduating. And I graduated 8 months after that, and I got a very respectful letter back that said that they were only accepting applicants that were conversationally fluent in either Arabic or Farsi. And what that basically was the landscape changed, the rules changed, and I became ill-equipped to play on that table when for the longest time I thought I was. And that there's an inherent sense of feeling like that's not fair. It wasn't done to me, though. It was just done in general. And was there collateral damage? Absolutely. But I could also wrap my brain around the why behind it. I could see, once I got out of my own head and got out of the emotion behind it, why they made that change. And in a lot of times in a lot of organizations, a lot of leaders, I think they assume that their employees understand the why behind things when the landscape changes, and they absolutely don't. And so when they feel like they're following the right path for a long time, and all of a sudden they don't have what it takes to play at the table anymore, they think you changed the rules on them. And instead of the landscape changed, whatever it was changed, what the focus or the importance of the organization was changed. It didn't happen to them, it just happened. And a lot of leaders, I think, fail, and that they aren't great at articulating how that process occurred, the why behind it, and making sure that that person still feels like what they have or what they're bringing has value. And if they want to still play at the table, you're going to do whatever you can to help them be there.
Now let me ask you. So in that example, was it easy to take that on when it happened? You know what I mean? Like what was that? How did that play out? And then how did you get through that from just a psychological standpoint?
It took several years. I don't think I was mature enough at the age of 22 or 23 years old to process that in that way. I was probably closer to 30 before I was able to not have any kind of negative feelings around it, where I felt like, where I felt any ill will, whereas I actually able to look at it objectively as opposed to through the cloud of emotion. And so I think I try to carry that with me in terms of a single mistake as a leader. If I'm a leader of people, a mistake like not articulating the why and allowing people to feel like something happened to them that was completely unfair. I mean, they didn't bring it on themselves. They didn't make a mistake. They didn't do anything wrong. If they internalize that as they were treated unfairly, it can literally ruin the relationship they have with their organization irreparably. It could cause them to disengage, to stop being productive, and eventually to move or to hang out for years doing poor work because they don't want to go anywhere else, but they don't feel like they have a future with that organization anymore. And so I really try to remember that when I lead people, in that there's no such thing as too much communication. And just because I know the why behind something doesn't mean everybody else does. And more importantly, even if everybody else knows the why behind something happening, it doesn't mean that they're in an emotional state to process it in a logical way. They still might be processing it in the way that says this happened to me, not this is just happening, and it might feel like it's unfair, but no one treated them unfairly. And how you approach that as a leader and how you articulate that with your people will have a profound effect on what their relationship is like with the organization and with you.
Yep, completely agree. And with that, it brings us to this episode's 1 minute hack.
The 1 minute hack.
Okay, for this episode's 1 minute hack, if you're a leader of people and you are going through currently, or you're about to go through, meaning it's inevitable that you're going to go through a major organizational change, a change of direction, a change of priorities, a change of what the organization is looking for from its employees, what I want you to do is I want you to make a point of having a conversation with each of your employees, not just individually, but as a group. Because this isn't about singling out individuals. It's about making sure that everybody on your team understands why something is happening. Make sure you get all your information so you can articulate this why correctly to them. And then make sure that you focus the conversation primarily on how this will impact them individually. how this will impact their future with the organization if they want one, the things that people were good at that might not be as valued anymore, the things that we hadn't put a value on in the past that are now going to have a high level of value on. And make sure you talk about that in front of the entire group, and then make yourself open for anybody to reach out to say, hey, you know what, this is kind of worrying me a little bit because I used to focus on this and now it feels like we're going this direction. How is this going to impact my future with the organization? Because I feel like I was career pathing here and now I feel like I'm back at square one. It's really important for you to be able to have those conversations with those individuals when they request them, to make sure they understand where they are still considered valuable with the organization and how you're going to help them play a part if they still want to have a future. Because even massive changes in direction usually don't make people have to start over at square one. It just requires a little bit of a change of direction. But if you don't articulate it in that way and you don't help them get there, they will end up back at square one because they don't react as quickly as they need to.
Yeah, it's a great 1 minute hack. And I think it's, important to remind ourselves that change is the only constant. And, evolution and all those types of things happen constantly with every business and every organization. So I think just really, preparing and having conversations with your people to be able to answer their questions, provide context and perspective is critical. Many times we just make assumptions that people will get it, but taking the time to really make sure they do is super important to building the right culture.
100%. Empathy goes a long way here too. If you're the leader and you're having these conversations, whatever you can pepper into those conversations about how these things have impacted you in the past and how you got through it, that will go a long way in terms of making sure that your people understand that they're not alone on this journey.
Yep. And with that, it brings us to the end of this episode. This is Hack Your Leadership. I'm Lorenzo.
And I'm Chris.
And we'll talk to you all next time.